So this is an HTC One M8 Google Play Edition. I am all for the Google Play Edition devices because they are of a pure Android nature, and yet they have the very same hardware that you would get if you were to get the device, say, from AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile. Then, of course, you can go even further with the tinkering with something like CyanogenMod. Until very recently, CyanogenMod has been very difficult to install. They very recently introduced an installer, and you can go ahead and check out YouTube for that. However, I think that these two categories, the CyanogenMod and the Google Play devices, speak to, I don't want to say an extreme minority of the market, but a minority that is such, that is a small portion compared with the general consumer. My very first phone was not a smartphone at all. In fact, it was this, the LG VX4500 for Verizon. And the main reason was because it was my first cell phone. This is about 10 years ago, and it was able to talk. That was the big selling point for me on this one. In fact, I didn't even know I was getting it. It was a Christmas present. Very basic, very, of course, to me at the time, the device was extremely functional because compared to the phones that my folks had, which were very candy bar-like monolithic screens, very, very basic, nowhere near as complex as the flip phones of the time. So at the time, it was a very modern handset. Now, after that, I had a couple of spills with that particular device. In fact, I had to get it replaced, and in its replacement, I managed to crack the screen, mainly because I was sitting the table I was sitting at was too close to my pocket, and I got up too fast, and the screen cracked. So I wanted something that would alleviate that, and that's where this comes in, the Samsung Convoy. And this has been a beautiful device. It is it's stood up to the test of time. It's been extremely durable, extremely reliable. And I think that this would be perfect for the average consumer who wants just a basic phone and is either requiring or desiring something that can take a punch. Then came the announcement of the iPhone on Verizon, and I decided to take the plunge and get the device. Now, originally I wanted something like the HTC Thunderbolt, but that was delayed, and I ended up going with the iPhone 4 instead. And I'm happy that I did because the iPhone was easy, it was a familiar environment, I could do a lot of great things with the device. However, at the same time, it wasn't immensely confusing. Then I decided to take a stab at Android, and the main reason was because it was nothing to do with iOS or the iPhone. It was mainly due to two things. Number one, I wanted diversity, and number two, because Android was considerably more flexible, and in a lot of ways still is considerably more flexible, and is definitely more geared towards the technically minded, like myself. And presently, I have a Samsung Galaxy Note 2 in service. I was showing it to somebody earlier today who was much more along the lines of the average consumer. They would have something like this Verizon phone here. This would be their first smartphone. And when I tried to explain this to them, I tried to explain all the things that you could do with the device, and they were primarily interested in having speech output for things like phone functions, and they did want to do a little bit more, but when I got into it, it kind of went over their head. Many, many moons ago, I remember somebody about my age who who I don't talk to much anymore. It was one of those deals where you kind of talk to somebody online and then they just randomly disappear through no fault of your own. They just maybe change screen names and forget to tell you. Anyway, I was talking to them and they were talking to me about, helping them with a computer. And I said, well, what kind of version of Windows do you have? They were like, I don't know. And I said, well, take a look at the start button. And I'm kidding. I'm not kidding about what they said. They said, what's that? So I think that for that class of consumer, something like the iPhone is honestly a much better bet than Android because, yes, it's more locked down. Yes, it's more walled garden. But you have to understand that the power user, the technically minded consumer, is something of a minority when you look at the big picture. And when I say big picture, I'm talking everybody. There are a lot more of the average everyday consumer than there are the power user and the technically minded user. It is for this reason that I think the iPhone will do really well. For somebody who wants a very simple smartphone, there's actually the Jitterbug Touch, which is geared towards being very simple to use. Now, I'm not saying this is not a full this is not a full-featured Android device. It is. You just tap this all apps and you've got it. You've got everything that you would get on a standard phone. However, by default, you're not presented with excuse me, let me find it. I'm using magnification. With this app grid that would confuse a lot of people. You are presented with a very nice, tidy little list that's very straightforward. So I think that for the average everyday consumer who's not necessarily up on the latest tech, iPhone, something like the Jitterbug Touch would do really nicely. Another device that I think would do really nicely is the Amazon Fire Phone. And yes, it is a completely different interface from what you're used to. But I think that with the Firefly feature, which I actually read on a blog post that the Firefly is actually the most innovative Mayday. I'm getting my words crossed. Mayday. The Mayday feature, which all you have to do is pull down from the top, hit the Mayday button, which kind of looks like a life preserver with the word Mayday in it, and within 15 seconds, you're talking to somebody, you're talking to life support. That is the Genius Bar on steroids, in my opinion. They said that this is the best technical support innovation since the Genius Bar. And I think that for the average consumer, now a lot of people have been saying that this phone will be won over by people who are major Amazon shoppers, and that's true. But I also see a market, and a lot of the technically minded people have been bashing this thing because they feel that they can get better specs for a lower price. What needs to be understood is that the average consumer doesn't care about specifications. They just want something to work, and if you're a major Amazon user, I couldn't think of a better device for the everyday consumer than a Fire Phone, because I haven't encountered what has been said to be honestly the best technical support out there. But I think that a lot of people in the tech community, we tend to talk amongst ourselves, and we kind of get lost in the general consumer space. And I think that what needs to be understood is we are not the majority. Things like Google Play Edition devices, which, by the way, from what I understand, once they're sold out, that's it. Google understands that they're not going to move very many of these. And also, on top of that, the average consumer is not willing to pay $700 or $800 for a phone. You may have heard me in a previous video say that you have to think about this as a mobile computer. Well, they are mobile computers, but there are a lot of people who, like myself, may be coming from a more basic phone. Maybe you may be used to having the capabilities of a basic phone with the added features of, like internet browsing and a smartphone and whatnot. But because they're coming from a basic phone, they may not realize that the device really is a pocket computer. Now, there are a lot of people from my generation who are picking up on this like super quick, but even they they just want something that can browse the web and can do what they need it to do. They're not interested in rooting their phones. They're not interested in spending $800 on a device because they want the smartphone functionality. But if you get into the technical nitty-gritty of Android, for instance, one of my former classmates, I would tell them, because I noticed they had an Android device, one of the early T-Mobile G1s, and I talked to them about how Android is a Linux-based operating system. Their eyes glassed over, and they asked me, what is Linux? And I had to kind of break it down in very general consumer. And this person was around my age. And so I think that a lot of people in the tech community need to understand that the average consumer isn't interested in specs, isn't interested in the technical nitty-gritties of the operating system, isn't interested in being able to break into it. They just want something that works. They just want something that does what they need it to do. And I think that that's why devices like the Jitterbug for an older audience, or maybe for a younger audience who's not so technically savvy, would benefit from the simplicity of an iOS device, and especially from the Fire Phone because of this Mayday feature. I think the Mayday feature is going to be a big selling point. But basically what I'm trying to get across here is the average consumer is the vast majority of consumers, and a lot of companies are trying to find a balancing point between this very vocal technology passionate minority and the rest of us. And to be honest, I think that Amazon and Apple have really got winners on their hands with the general consumer. That's why the Kindle Fire tablet has been selling so well, is the fact that it's cheap, it does what people need it to do. They don't have any interest in running running custom ROMs or anything like that. They just want something cheap, easy to use, and I think that that's what a lot of the people that are more passionate about the technology, that really truly get into it to the point of building their own PC, modding their phones, and that sort of thing. I'm not saying that everybody's like this. I'm saying that some people seem to be, at least from what I've seen in the YouTube comments on various videos. It seems to me like the people that are into the technologically savvy side of things are kind of out of touch with the average everyday consumer. Now, I'm not saying everybody's like that. I'm saying that there are people out there that are like that. But what do you guys think? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.